Hey everybody, welcome back to the Lead Management Masterminds podcast. This is Scott Payne, your host of this wonderful show. So happy to have with me two special guests today. This is the third part in our three-part series of, call it our updated best practices, things that we've seen over and over again, that we are updating our best practices and really thinking through, running the data and come up with our documented best practices that we believe that all of our clients need to be using or should be taking advantage of. This is our third part series. This is about duplicate management. I would say we saved the best for last, and I think we did in a couple of levels, but duplicate management, something about it just doesn't sound that fun. Doesn't sound, it's always one of those things that I'm just like, I don't know if I like it that much, but we know, and you should know, it's extremely critical that you have this stuff set up correctly, because if you don't, you could be wasting money, spending money here that you don't know you're losing. You could be having, opportunities missed as things are coming in, and we're going to tackle all of those things today. I have today with me again, Ben Schor, who you guys all know, but also have a new special guest for you guys today, Mr. Michael Peranto. Mr. Mike, how you doing there today?
I'm doing great. Glad to be on here, Scott.
Good to have you, Mike. Mike's a first-time guest to the live series, but if you go back to episode 3 or 4, I believe, he was an early Lead Management Masterminds podcast guest back in his days at Cardinal. So glad to have Mike back on the live version here. We'll have him on future series as well. That said, I'm excited to kick it over. Enough of me talking. I'm going to kick it over to Ben and Mike, and they're going to do a lot of the talking today and talking through our best practices. We've received a lot of questions actually about this topic. As I posted duplicate management, we were receiving messages through LinkedIn as well as through email. So I have those questions to show later for our guests as well. But if you have a comment or a thought or a question, or you just want to say hi to us, because we're all virtual, say hi. And if you say hi, I can throw you up onto the screen. In fact, I think we might even have someone today. Oh, but it doesn't show me who. It's just LinkedIn user. So hey, LinkedIn user, thanks for posting today. But you all can do that as well. All you got to do is submit a comment on either YouTube or LinkedIn. We'll be able to see that comment, that question, whatever you'd like to say. We'll get you up on the screen, give you a shout out. That said, I'm turning it over to my man, Ben. Ben, how you doing today?
I'm all good. Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. So yeah, guys, to get things started, Scott mentioned that duplicate management and all of his faces he made. There's a reason for that, right? It's because for anyone who's used Velocify a decent amount, you know that duplicate management is the most complicated part of Velocify, period. There's so many other things that Velocify can do. Duplicate management, I've spoken to so many Velocify admins who know the system so well. They do so many things. And I say, what do you have set up in duplicate management? And they're like, I'm not really sure. It's a complicated one. So what we're going to talk about here today, similar to the last couple of sessions around best practices, we're going to focus not so much on exactly what the best practices are in terms of solutions, but more the things that you need to be keeping an eye out for. Because depending on your business, you may want to do duplicate management in a bunch of different ways. So what we're going to focus today on is the different types of things you need to be thinking about when you're talking about duplicate management within the Velocify system. Now, part of duplicate management that many people think of is Encompass. So if you're using Encompass and you're kind of matching your leads to your loans, there's a duplicate management aspect to that. We touched on that in the last session. We're not really going to spend much time on that here today. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the things that I often hear about duplicate management. And I like to use some of these quotes, because chances are anyone who's watching this video, you've said one of these things at some point in time. That's probably why you're here. So some of the things that I've heard over the years is admins will say, I haven't touched duplicate management since someone else set it up, so I'm not even really sure exactly how it works. I've heard, I dive into duplicate management. I like making changes, but I can tell you that it feels like I'm playing whack-a-mole, because every time I fix something else suddenly isn't working the way I thought it was. And I just continue around that cycle nearly forever. And at some point in time, you kind of give up, or you just keep fixing things and accidentally breaking other things. I've heard sometimes it feels like duplicate management, it causes kind of more problems than it helps, which I know isn't true. Everyone will say that they know it's not true, but there's just a lot of trouble using it properly. Quite often we hear sometimes it feels like there's so many options and I still can't get it to do what I want it to do. And that's why we are here today to talk about all of these different duplicate management options and choices and configurations. As kind of a baseline starting point, what I want to do is talk about at a high level-ish, the different things that the Velocify system can do in terms of duplicate management. I'm going to go through a bunch of them. Mike's going to chime in along the way with some of his thoughts on these. But kind of keep in mind here, there are lenders out there who have their own homegrown solutions for whether it's duplicate management or for lead management instead of Velocify, whatever it might be. And the great thing about these homegrown solutions is that you can kind of make them do whatever you want them to do. The tougher part about them is in general, they require development or engineering work, which means cycles and resources and so on and so forth. And I mention this because as I go through these different scenarios, different options for how you want to use Velocify's duplicate management solution, at some point in time, you might be thinking, well, why does it have to be exactly like that or exactly like that? And that's what you get when you work with software, right? Is you don't get as many options, but you can make these things happen with the click of a button or a couple of selections. So I want to kind of help everyone to understand what those different options are, what those selections are. So with that said, I'm going to start sharing my screen. Hopefully I'm going to do this properly. And Scott, if you can help me out making this happen, that would be great. And Scott, can you let me know when you're seeing what you want to be seeing?
Yeah, I think we're good. See the screen?
Very good. Okay. So let's go through. We've got a PowerPoint here that just kind of has a good graphical representation of what we're talking about. And I'll be pausing in between. Mike's going to chime in along the way. So when we're thinking about duplicate management, again, these are just kind of basic different options that the Velocify system has. We're always going to be talking about an existing lead and then a new lead coming in and what you want to do with that. In this case, you'll see the existing lead is contact attempt 5. That's just an example. It could be anything. So scenario number 1, you've got an existing lead and a new lead pops in. The first scenario is you might see, and you'll see at the top for each of these scenarios, don't merge, just create new lead. So this is a straightforward one where even though the new lead matches the existing lead based off of first name, last name, phone, we can get into all that another time. But even though there's a match, for some reason you decide that you want to keep these completely separate as 2 different leads. It's the most simple approach in terms of kind of cleanliness, right? You've got 2 leads. Each lead came in from each different lead source, whatever it might be, but it's 2 separate leads and they're going to be treated as 2 separate leads, plain and simple. Mike, anything there on where you might see companies want to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So some scenarios for that is, you may have an existing web lead that you purchased from like a lead provider like LendingTree. But let's say you send out like a mailer campaign or something of that nature and the customer calls in. You may not want that mailer call-in to be merged against the LendingTree lead. You may want a brand new lead created under that mailer campaign so you could properly attribute the cost allocations to it.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a good one. And as Mike's going through some of these scenarios, you're going to want to continue to think, well, Ben's about to show me some other options. Maybe some of the other options are better used. And it just, again, like I said at the beginning, it depends on your specific situations as an organization and fitting the right scenarios that we're going to share with you here with what you guys have and what the best practices would be for your specific scenario. That's what we do at SDP Solutions, right? So reach out if you'd like us to be able to help you with that. But let's move on to the second one. Duplicate management again. Got an existing lead. New lead comes in. One of the other things that you can do is you can take that existing lead and you can put it below the new lead. For anyone who's used duplicate management and Velocify a decent amount, you know that there's a concept of a parent lead and a child lead. Real quick recap on that. A parent lead is when you take a lead that just came in or the new lead. We'll talk about that in a moment. The parent lead is when you keep one. The child lead is the one that you kind of put below the parent lead. So there's that parent-child relationship. But the key to understanding this overall approach that Velocify provides is once you've merged a lead and you have a parent and a child, the parent lead is the one that everybody sees easily through the leads page and through basic reporting. You can action them, email, so on and so forth. The child lead is almost like an archive lead, except for it's tied to that parent lead. And I call it an archive lead because it's not in your basic lead view. It's not in your basic reporting. You can't take actions or email against it. It kind of moves below it. And that parent-child relationship is one of the key things to understand as you're making decisions on how you want to do all of this. Now, in this case, again, that's parent-child relationship. In this case, the scenario we're saying is you have a new lead. Let me back it up again. A new lead comes in. And when that new lead comes in and matches the existing lead, you might decide that you want to have that existing lead be the child of the new lead. Now, there's pros and cons to doing this. The pro of doing it this way is you got a new lead coming in. You know that it's a new lead. So you're in really good shape there because it stays as a lead. It stays as the parent lead, which is the main one. The con to doing it this way is, and many of you may know this, if you don't, it's very important that you remember what I'm about to say here. All of the actions that were taken on that existing lead, called, left message, not interested, whatever it might be, those actions basically disappear from your reporting when you do this. So if you have a report that's going to show you how many times Ben Schor took the action of not interested over X amount of time, if you're on that report today, and then you merge that and it becomes a child lead, and then you run that report tomorrow, Ben will suddenly have one less action, which sounds like it should make no sense, but this is why. So there's pros and cons. You still may want to do this sometimes, but there's pros and cons. Mike, any thoughts here?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the other benefits of if you do choose to make the new lead the parent is sometimes when you do have the historical notes from the existing leads, the loan officers can come to, almost like conceptions of what this lead is about based on the historical notes. So there are some situations, and we'll talk about this a little bit later from a reporting standpoint of why you may want to make the new lead the parent, but we'll talk about that later on in the webinar.
Yeah, Mike, I love your first comment there because it's kind of a reminder to the group that when you hear something in any software solution that sounds like a limitation, for some other scenario, it might actually be what you're looking for, right? I said, hey, you lose those visible notes, and you might say, well, we actually want that, right? So it's really important to think about how it applies. So I think that's a great one. Okay, next scenario. As you might imagine, this is going to be kind of the reverse. You have your existing lead, new lead comes in, and in this case, we're going to take the new lead and we're going to make it the child while keeping the existing lead. Now, in this case, we need to think about the pros and cons as being kind of the reverse of what we talked about beforehand, right? In this case, if I run a report that says very simply, how many leads did I get from lead source A today? If a new lead came in from lead source A, but becomes the child lead in this scenario, then that lead provider is going to say, I sent you 10 leads. And you're going to say, no, you only sent me 9. Now, there are Velocify reports that will show you that you actually did get 10 and that one of them became the child, but you need to know to look for that. And it can be hard to remember to look for that. Plus, in other reports that you might use regularly, you're just not going to be able to see it. So that's a reason why you need to kind of be careful with this type of approach. But the good part about this is now when this lead is being worked, we can see that the new lead becomes the child, but all of those old notes are still there. So again, the pros and cons are kind of the reverse of what we talked about beforehand. Mike, any thoughts here in terms of when to use this?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are actually several scenarios where you may want the existing lead to stay the parent. So one really, really easy example here is, let's say the existing lead is an application that was taken within the last 5 to 10 days, and you bought you're buying leads from LendingTree or any type of lead provider that's out there. You get a new lead from them. You don't want that lead to be dispersed to the general floor to be called. You want it to be merged against the existing record. You may want to take an action on that lead that triggers an alert to the loan officer. But other than that, you really don't want that consumer to be called. In addition, if there's like a scheduled appointment for it, etc.
Yeah, and Mike, you brought up the idea of an action, email, things of that nature. We're going to talk about that in a little bit as well if we have some time at the end about some additional things you can do with the duplicate management tool above and beyond simply merging and which one is the parent and which one is the child.
Yep.
The next scenario is one that I think some organizations aren't really thinking enough about, which is kind of a combination of the last two, which is a new lead comes in, and we want to keep the notes from the existing lead. So we put the new lead as the child, but as you can see, the existing lead gets what I like to call refreshed as a new lead. So again, let me show you. It might be contact attempt 5, and you might refresh it as a new lead. Where this can be extremely helpful, again, is when you want to keep your notes, but you also want to kind of treat the new lead as a new lead. So again, it kind of combines the two. There are some things you need to watch out for when you use this approach, but I just wanted to make sure to share with the group because I think many people are not thinking about this. Mike, thoughts there?
Yeah, and Ben, to your point, one really, really good example on this is let's say you had a lead where the current status of it, the existing lead, the current status of it was like contact attempt 9, where, in your contact strategy, you may be calling it every 3 to 5 days. If you get a new lead record from a different lead source, you can merge these two together, change the status to the status of new, and then you're basically resetting that contact strategy to that more aggressive contact strategy on the front end to contact the borrower.
Yeah, and the way I always try to think about it is I say to customers we work with, hey, when you're trying to figure out what you want to do here, forget Velocify for a second. Forget the system. Pretend that you're just getting this, someone hands you a piece of paper with a new lead. What would you want to do with it knowing what's going on with the existing lead? And that's one of the cool things that Velocify does allow you to do, which can be somewhat hard to configure properly. Again, this is where we can be there to help. But the idea of saying, look, when it matches to an existing lead, what we want to do with it is very different based off of whether the existing lead is in an application status or a contacted status or an uncontacted status, or if it's more than X amount of days old, or if it's owned by different teams within our organization. You can have duplicate management do different things based off of all that information. That's where I mentioned the fact that it can get complicated is you can do all of those things, but you better do them right. Otherwise, the system can act all kinds of wacky, which we'll get to in a little bit as well.
Right.
Okay. Next scenario, and this will be our last one, is, again, new lead comes in, and I wanted to share something you cannot do, which sounds strange because everything I've been talking about is things that you can do. But the reason I wanted to share what you cannot do is because I've been hearing this more and more and more recently. So I just want everyone to know that aside from one really wonky solution we came up with, which is not great, basically you really can't do what I'm about to describe. And this is when you have an existing lead that is owned by a certain user. You have a new lead come in, and what you want to do is you want to say, keep them as separate leads. But because the existing lead is owned by Ben, I now want to assign the new lead to Ben. The most common scenario here, I'm going to steal maybe some of Mike's thunder here. The most common scenario here is this could be a funded loan or an application that's in flight, and we now have a new opportunity. So we say, look, I got a funded loan. It's owned by Ben. We just got another inquiry. If it was Ben's customer, then we want to go ahead and route that new lead to Ben. From a business standpoint, it makes all the sense in the world. You should want to do it. Unless someone wants to teach me something new, there is no fairly elegant way to do this. So I'll just apologize to the group. Mike, any thoughts on this one?
No, Ben, you're exactly right. It's just one of the limitations of the Velocify system, and it's something that we deal with on a regular basis.
Cool. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful for the group. I've stopped sharing my screen there. Like I said, kind of leading into that whole section, if you don't understand those options in depth, then trying to set up your own duplicate management or change your own duplicate management and use some of those concepts, if you try to do it without really understanding them in depth, it's going to be tough. And like I said, that's where you want to reach out to us if you're having any problems at all. More often than not, if you think the system can't do it, it actually can, and we can help you to get that done.
Yeah, there was actually a question, or it was me. I'll just say it's going to show here. But a quick poll for those that leave to the comments, like how many duplicate management programs are used in their instance of Velocify today, without naming names, because I know we know them by name, but what is the most duplicate management programs you've seen in someone's instance? I think I might win. I'm not sure if you guys have worked with them in the past. It's not a mortgage company, but Ben, Mike, again, don't name names. We don't want to.
I had one that was at 55.
Okay. 55?
So I'm going to give my answer, but then I'm curious to hear from you guys. From my perspective, there should usually be a reason about the way that business operates for that. So I don't know the number of mine. I think it's close to 60. I'd have to check. But the reason, and this is really important, the reason is because they do all portfolio retention, which means that they know that the new leads that they're generating are duplicates, and there are going to be a lot of them, and they need to handle them extremely strategically, because not only do they do portfolio retention, but they also have two teams. They have a team that kind of warms up the lead and tries to make contact, like an opener type of person. And then they also have their licensed loan officers, which means all of their rules that they have are going to apply at least a little bit differently, depending on if the most recent active lead is owned by one team or the other. So it basically doubles the number of programs that they need.
So you guys are close, but unfortunately, I'm going to win this one. 450 programs.
Why?
For a client that I had back in the day. So part of it was a university, and former students and prospects. A lot of a student who is interested today. They put it off. They come back 3 months later. There's just multiple lead sources, and it's pretty complex. So 450 is my record. But that said, I think we reduced it down. If I have, this is a couple of years ago, we reduced it down by using a lookup tool, essentially, to look up data before it got into the system, which I know we had actually had a question about using some middleware maybe to do that, and maybe we can elaborate on that. So maybe that's a good segue into that, Ben, unless you wanted to go anywhere else right now. Let me jump to that question real quick. We actually have a participant telling us their quick poll here. Paul, 45, and he's building more this week. Hey, Paul, how you doing? Thanks for joining, man. We got Kevin. Previous organizations had hundreds, so yeah, hundreds there.
So quick comment there, Scott. I know you're trying to get something else. If you have more than 50, you should reevaluate. I'm not saying that every single organization can get below 50, because it depends on what they are. But I can tell you many, many times I've seen rules where I've said things like, hey, have you thought about bringing this down? And they say, no, we need them all. Then I run a quick report and find that 10%, 15, 20% of their programs are catching nothing. And it's very easy to run that type of report. So reevaluate.
Yeah, and especially with that many programs, could lead to latency in the system, and when leads are going in, because you're running through all these systems, maybe going through unnecessary. And also, just go ahead and add there too. What we found was that we were really slow through this as well. On that 450, we found there were a couple programs that were using filters such as does not contain, for example. So does not contain, right. So it has to check everything that doesn't contain that, which is everything, versus being very specific to say contains these specific things or is in this list and what have you. So let me jump into this. This is the question about the middleware that came in on LinkedIn overnight. So what are some of the benefits to having a middleware solution in between your lead providers and the CRM system?
Great, Scott. I'll go ahead and field that one. So we get this. We have many clients who, are seeking to either build their own middleware solution or use a third-party solution. Some of the third-party solutions that are available to you. There's Active Prospects Lead Conduit, as well as Leadspedia, et cetera. But the reason to have a middleware solution between your lead providers and your CRM system is, number one, you can do live rejections of duplicate leads. So as an example, let's say you receive a lead from lead provider A, and then you receive the same lead a day later from lead provider B. As opposed to paying for the cost of the second lead that you receive, you just live reject it, and then you have just saved on that cost. Number two, you can do some pre-screening of leads. So one of the pre-screens that's offered by many middleware tools is the ability to check to see if the contact that you've received or the lead is a known TCPA litigant. So you can just automatically reject those. You don't even have to worry about calling them, and it helps to protect your organization. Some other things you can do as well, you can score the customer's information for the propensity of your organization to actually close that lead. So what some companies do is if the lead hits a certain score, they live reject it. And if a lead does hit the system, you've got that score into the Velocify system, and you can take the lower scoring leads and maybe give them to a third-party contact center to call and do some pre-screening questions before live transferring them to your loan officers. And then the higher scoring leads would go to your higher performing loan officers. In addition, you can query third-party systems. So like, we have some companies that will actually query their existing portfolio to see if they are existing leads, and do particular routing with that.
Been anything to add there?
No, super thorough.
Yeah, nailed it. So yeah, there was another question about live rejection. So I think we can avoid that question. If you guys need tools, that are available out there and reputable companies to work with, we can make recommendations there and talk to you about the pros and cons of each one, and go through that if it's something that you need to build or what have you. So, Ben, do you want me to go through the rest of the questions? Anything to add? Overall best practices as we wrap that up before we get to questions. There's quite a few questions coming in.
Yeah, I got one here, Scott. So when you're going through and you're designing your duplicate management programs in Velocify, you want to make sure that you are keeping in mind of how clean is the solution that you're designing. So, one thing that I always like to think about is if a new administrator comes on board, let's say you leave and another one comes on board, how easy is it for them to understand how those duplicate management programs are designed? And number two, do you have the appropriate documentation for it? So, often when I go through and I review duplicate management for companies, first I check their existing programs. Second, as we're going through the design process, I will actually put the rules that I've built into an Excel spreadsheet. So that way, if a future admin needs to see it, they can reference the spreadsheet, they have the appropriate documentation, etc.
All right. Another question came in here, and I figured out who our LinkedIn user was. That's Aru, CEO of BotSplash. So Aru, thanks for I'm not sure why it says LinkedIn user there, but let's see. So she says, how difficult is dupe management if and when a customer share incorrect information intentionally or unintentionally? An example being a fake number or email is used and the duplicate management links to the wrong past customer or what have you.
Yeah, I'll roll with this one. So with many software solutions, you kind of need to make decisions on how you want to handle edge cases, right? So this is an edge case, but it's one that exists. So if you know that people in general are going to do 555, 555, 5555, or fake email at gmail.com or whatever it might be, you need to decide how you want to account for that. In general, what most of our customers do is they say, let's match duplicates on last name plus something, last name plus phone, last name plus email, because you can do that in Velocify. That's what most do. But there are times, and Mike and I actually spoke about this fairly recently, where we said, hey, sometimes people fat finger their last name, but their email address has got to be right. So Mike and I were actually talking recently about whether it's a good idea when doing some of the dupe checking to do just email and not include last name in there. And there's a trade-off with all of these scenarios. So I think it's a good question to ask. In the end, the answer ends up being you have to decide between kind of two balances. There's no kind of soft value checking, like this one kind of looks like that one. It has to be exact matches. So you kind of have to make your best decision, and that's something that we can help customers with.
Yeah, and Ben, real quick here, just to chime in, that's one of those things too. If you choose to go the middleware route, there are some common scenarios that you can just either reject or update via the middleware. So like if you get a lead with a phone number that's all the same digits, all sevens, all sixes, all fives, all fours, you just flat reject it. You don't even take it into the system whatsoever.
Yeah, and I saw this recently with a client who, I would say it was maybe intentional in this case because, a customer, when putting information out on, let's say, a lead form, they're going to put, I've seen in the past, will put an email address that's not their best email address. It's an email address they have access to, but they don't want to, mess up their actual email they work, working out of, et cetera. So what I've seen is they'll start with one email address. And then when they get to, for example, in this case was a POS system, and they go into start an application, now they're going to put their real email address.
Right.
And what we had to figure out for this client was that we were trying to just do certain fields, last name and email address. And in this case, we weren't catching it. So we had to add a little bit. We had to go a little further down the funnel into the POS before we actually took the lead in. For example, we had to say, okay, what is the state and what is the phone number and what is the email? We had to match it all on that. Essentially we were creating leads too early in the process. We were just creating when we had an email and a name. What we really needed to get was phone number and other information to then create the lead in Velocify. So we had a way to match it up. Otherwise, we had all these leads that were just sitting out there as brand new leads, and we had the original lead sitting there that wasn't getting credit for something that had converted or someone that had gone online. So you got to consider some of those. At what point in the process are your leads created, and what information is on them when they come in?
Yeah,
right.
and also Scott, to your point there, that kind of goes back to the importance of like how you design your duplicate management. Like there's always going to be those edge cases where somebody puts in a bad email or maybe a bad phone number. But that's why you want those layers where you're checking last name and email, last name and phone, last name and mobile phone, et cetera. It's not going to catch everything. There's always going to be some edge cases that get through and do some things that you don't want it to do. But that's why you want to make sure you're checking multiple scenarios for duplicate management.
Awesome. All right. Next question I have up. Actually, I'm going to go over to a special person to all of us here on this this webinar here. Hey, Billy. Billy, thanks for joining. So Billy asked if we make the existing lead the parent to keep a historical log, but we still want the marketing attributes such as the new lead source and web traffic data such as UTM parameters. Is that possible?
Mike, you want that?
Yeah, absolutely. So through the duplicate management tool, if you're keeping the existing lead the parent, you have the ability to not only update system fields like a lead source, et cetera, but you can also bring over fields from the new lead that came in. So if you had like a UTM parameter, et cetera, you can take that UTM parameter and actually push it and update it on the existing lead record for those types of reports.
And I just got a message from Billy. He said he knew the answer to this, but this was a question that he received as well. So Billy knows the answer
all the time.
He was just posting it for them. All right, let's move on to our next question. We have about 10 minutes or so left. I think we should be able to get through the rest of these. There's really a lot coming in, so it's good stuff here. Let's see. My duplicate management tool seems to be broken. Are others seeing this also? I don't really have much context here, but that came in as well.
I'll go ahead and I'll fill this one, Ben, and you can chime in after as well. So this is actually probably one of the most common cases that used to come to me when I worked at Velocify, as well as when I worked at SDP Solutions. Clients would come to us and say, "Hey, the duplicate management tool is broken. It's doing all these weird things. I don't quite understand it." That is actually very, very common. And what it is that nobody's actually sat down recently, and sometimes it's a new admin coming in, the old admin designed it, et cetera. There's no documentation for it. And, a lot of it just has to do with either a misunderstanding for how the system is designed, a lack of any sort of previous documentation. And, really what you need to do is start digging into how every single one of those duplicate management programs are, and then make the adjustments accordingly. We can obviously help you with that here at SDP Solutions, but this is a very, very common question that we get from many different admins. Ben, do you have any additional thoughts?
I would say very simply, don't assume that because you thought something couldn't be done, that it can't be done. So if you're listening to this, you're watching this, and you're thinking, we've been having a problem with this, no one can figure it out, you're probably looking at the people that can figure it out.
Agree. Definitely agree with that. All right. Let's go to the next question here. I guess this came in. Yeah, this came in, I guess, when you were talking about going through the spreadsheet there. So, yeah, what should I do? Keep the new one as a parent or the existing one as a parent?
So I'm going to roll with this one because when I see this question, it makes me laugh because I asked this type of simplistic question when it's way too simplistic. Like I remember I came to Mike early on and I said, "Mike, I don't understand. Like you should always keep the existing one." He said, "Yep. No, you shouldn't." And we talked about it for a little while. And in the end, the answer to this question is there's no single answer. It depends on your business. It depends on the scenario within your business. The answer is never going to be always one or always the other. It's always going to depend. So if you're asking this question, and again, I asked this exact question in this exact way, it's worth further discussion.
Yeah, and Ben, to your point there, some common like reporting needs and stuff can vary from company to company. So, as an example, there are some companies that say, hey, if I have a lead, if I have a lead in the system, let's say it's 5 days old, and I get another new lead in the system, I may take that second new lead and just merge it onto that first lead that was 5 days old, just because it's within the first 30 days of receipt of the other one. Then if I get, let's say, another scenario where I've got a lead that's 100 days old or 200 days old, it's not contacted, and I get a brand new lead that comes in, I want to make that new lead the parent for marketing attribution purposes. There are many, many different reasons for why you would make a lead an existing lead or why you would choose a new lead. It definitively varies from organization to organization. There's no concrete rules that I've seen between the two, but we can obviously advise you on what we've seen other companies have done and have you make the correct decision.
All right, good stuff. 2 more questions. One came in from YouTube. I don't have a username on that, but let's see. How does the Encompass sync play into all of the duplicate management stuff we're talking about here?
Yeah, I'll roll with this one first.
Yep.
The Encompass sync at its core from the very beginning, when we started over a decade ago, the way that it simply worked is you had a lead in Velocify, you exported it to Encompass. That made that newly created loan in Encompass and that lead automatically sync together. And that was it. It had nothing to do with duplicate management at all. But then over the years, when online applications became more and more the way that almost everyone applies for a loan rather than doing it over the phone, now you've got this kind of independent loan created in Encompass that needs to find its way back to that lead in Velocify, and you need to use duplicate management for that. In addition to that, there are some nuances which we discussed briefly on a previous session. There are some nuances to the way that syncing works that you actually can't even see. You have to go to a Velocify technical support person to ask them what's going on in the background. It's complicated, but it's very, very important. So if you're having any issues with your Encompass sync, first of all, you can go back and watch our other session on the Encompass sync best practices, but definitely reach out to us at SDP Solutions and we can talk to you in detail about some best practices there. But the duplicate management component is as important as anything else as part of the Encompass sync these days. Mike, anything?
No, Ben, I know that you had covered this in a previous session, but absolutely, duplicate management with the Encompass sync is important. It's really just come around the last 5 to 10 years where Velocify created that lead create function. And, we have a set solution that we advise for clients when we set up databases. It goes around canceled loan, what should you do with canceled loans, what should you do with pre-approvals, et cetera. But it's very important that you get that configured correctly.
All right. One last question. And this, it's asking about tips and tricks. And for those that maybe saw my live video on Friday, we're doing some tips and tricks. I'll be doing that again this Friday. By the way, I haven't fully announced that yet, but I'm going to do it again this Friday. So I'm not going to cover this one because you guys are the duplicate management experts here. But what are some of the tips and tricks you can give when trying to understand or troubleshoot the duplicate management programs? That's a great question.
So I'll roll through a couple of them real quick. The first is many people don't realize that there's great logging within the lead when duplicate stuff happens. Like if there's a duplicate merge, you can actually see within the lead that the status changed from this to this if there's merging there. This becomes extremely helpful when you're looking through your Encompass sync duplicate rules as well, actually, because you can see things like, wait a second, the loan number from Encompass changed on my lead. Why would that happen? And that'd be really, really important for troubleshooting purposes. So that's first is look at the lead, especially for merging, see what's going on in there. It's extremely helpful. The second tip I'd have is when you're looking at a lead and you see that it has duplicates within it, you might be thinking, well, which rule caught that? Why did something happen? what you need to do is you need to go to your confirmed duplicate report, find that lead. You basically have to search for it based off of dates and things like that. Find that lead. And then in that confirmed duplicate report, it will show you which duplicate program caught that dupe. And then you can go and look at that dupe program to see what happens. So you kind of have to take it in a couple of steps. Otherwise, it can be extremely confusing as to what happens when duplicates are merged. Mike, any other thoughts there?
No, I don't, Ben. You covered that very thoroughly.
Forget that.
Yeah.
All right. We are right at 40 minutes. We try to keep these around 30 to 40 minutes during people's lunch break. Give them a chance to join us for the exciting world of Velocify best practices. Hope everyone's enjoyed this 3-part series. We're working on some additional content for everyone as we speak. I'm going live again this Friday, to be announced soon. Also started to record some live podcasts again, or some podcasts again. We'll be interviewing David Tal from Verse tomorrow, and that should be released shortly after. That's the CEO from Verse. And then we should have a couple of important guests to share with you guys after that here coming up. Mike, Ben, thanks for joining. Thanks for taking the time to do this. Any parting thoughts?
Love you, Scott.
Happy end of June.
Yeah.
We're almost halfway through the year. Can you believe it?
Yep. I would say really my only parting thought is even though duplicate management is intimidating, it is extremely important. Don't keep putting it off. It's costing your organization money, etc. You just need to sit down, understand it, and if you need assistance with the SDP Solutions can definitely help you.
Ooh, I got one more. There's a custom reporting type called leads and duplicates. If you don't know what it is, ask someone. It's important.
And I have one last thing, because I was thinking about this as well. I didn't know if we wanted to mention or not, but everyone has that alert. Like you have 5,000 unwritten, duplicates.
Oh, yep.
I guarantee if people are looking at that right now, or looking at it every day and think, oh, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow.
Yep.
Put it off. So if you have that, let us know. We can help. We have lots of different scenarios and things that we can help you figure out what to do to clean those up. Even have some ways to maybe even delete those and give you a fresh start going forward. So on that, have a great day. Thanks for joining us on the Lead Management Masterminds podcast, live edition, part 3 of 3, duplicate management best practices. Thanks everybody for joining. Have a great rest of your week.